Will the folks in the back of the room come on in, sit down, and somebody close the door, please? All right, we'll try again. Will the folks in the back of the room come in, sit down, and somebody close the door, please? Welcome to Acme. CFRG will be in this place the second hour. So if you're here only for CFRG, go read email or something, in your free time. We need a note taker. We have a JabberScribe. Joe, thank you. Is someone willing to take notes? Bueller, anyone? Aaron? Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. Robin? I couldn't see it. But I did see it. Yeah. I think it was Robin. Okay. At the end of the meeting, just send the minutes, to the mail. Just send the minutes to the mailing list. We'll correct them and post them. Thank you very much. Sorry.
Okay. Good. So this is a note well. I'm sure you've seen that a couple of times this week. Note it well. On the agenda, well, we have the blue sheets circulating. We've got scribes. Thank you. We'll do a brief status. Then we'll see presentation on STAR and devices at the station, client certificates, and finally TNOF. And don't believe we're actually going to have time for open mic, but no. So any agenda bashing? Going once, going twice? Oh, yeah.
So Tim Wysinski, you want to raise your hand, wave over there? Tim has a draft on an alternate CAA proposal. He's presented it. Oh, don't just.
Oh, I'll sit down. Okay.
Yeah, just sit down. That's the guy there. Yeah, he's got a draft on using a different way to do CAA, which is very of great interest, obviously, to Acme. His two slides, which we will not have time for, are in the meeting materials page off the data tracker. So either here or in LAMP's next session, we'll get formal time and discussion. Just be aware of it and take a look. Seems pretty good to me. Oh, the video thing. Yeah. Parts of this session are being video recorded for YouTube, IETF YouTube video on Acme. Shouldn't be any issues. It's just like the video sessions are live streamed. I don't know where our cameraman is. Just make sure you turn to get your good side in the profile. Thank you.
Okay, so start with status. So finally, RFC 8555 is out. I promised ticker tape, but ticker tape doesn't look good, so I added a confetti thing. Some stats. So we've had 19 draft versions of the working group draft, plus 5 of the individual draft. Took 50 months from the first individual 00 to final RFC. And during that time, we went from 36 pages to 95. That's pretty much common for the IETF. So, great, we've reached our first and most important milestone. Other stuff. We got the first version of draft Acme Star Delegation. We have new revisions, 02 of auth, TNOth, and 03 appeared this week. Please read and comment. CAA has version 6 in AD evaluation. Acme IP 05 is also in AD evaluation. No new revisions of SMIME and email TLS, but Alexei promises that we will have new revisions next time. And no new revisions of Acme TLS ALPN, which is in state AD evaluation, revised AD needed since December 24th. So we might want to get a new revision there.
Hi, AD here for the next 6 or 7 hours. I just took a look at Acme IPO5. Apparently my comment of security considerations was resolved by removing the security considerations section. That's not in compliance with Literary 552, so you're going to have to put one back in and actually have some security considerations, and I'm assuming Roman will violate them.
Okay. So, any comments on that before we move to the next presentations? Okay, in that case, presentations, and I think first off is Johan.
Click photo. So good morning. I'll be talking about STAR. STAR, short-term automatically renewed certificates. We requested publication of this document. We received an AD review from Acme. Thank you, Eric. And everything in version 05 is based on that review. Specifically, there were questions about timing, when exactly certificate issuance happens, how that relates to potential time skew on the client side, exactly when the certificate is available on the server, and how that relates to the not before, not after on the certificate. So all of that we made into its own section, clarifying the whole thing, giving diagrams, more formal description of these various time periods. We also found out that we need to actually add a parameter. So a parameter coming in from the client saying, I'm running on a client that's potential or that may experience a long time skew. So I expect to have, I don't know, a 5-day time skew if I'm badly misconfigured. Please take into account. Please take that into account. The server can, of course, decide to ignore the whole thing and just assume no time skew, or it can actually use it when it computes the timing for certificate issuance. So that's all there in a new section, a new diagram, and this new parameter. The other significant change is in line with a recent discussion on the baseline protocol, and that's unauthenticated GET. We already had negotiation of unauthenticated GET, but now we clarify, as we should have before, that this implies capability URLs to avoid some attacks. So these are the two important changes based on the AD review, and then there's a few other nits. So with that in mind, we propose to move forward and publish the document.
Okay. How many people have read the draft? Fair number. Do you think we need to do the last call again with all the changes you've made?
We don't, because the new discussion about timing is things that were already implicit in the text, but were just clarified. So we don't believe a second working group last call is needed.
Okay. So
guys.
let's have people read this, and unless somebody screams at the mailing list that no, we really need to discuss this again, I think we're ready to move forward. Unless our AD thinks different.
So Roman Danilio, so what's the difference between asking people to read it to figure out whether that's the next step and doing a second short working group last call?
Less formal. And it's easier to interpret silence as assent. Okay, thank you. Next is... Oh.
Well, there's still the issue of the status of the document, unless you're planning to advance it as informational. So in my review, I asked the question, who's planning to implement and deploy this? Because Roman may feel differently, and he'll be able to make his own opinion, but I'm not going to ask something to be advanced or proposed standard if nobody's has actually committed to deploying it. So, I guess, I don't know. Roman, are you the new AD for this? Yeah, so these are your problems. So I don't know what your policy is. That was my question.
Yeah, I'm not up to speed on that feedback, so I have to take a look.
So the consensus of the working group was to take it as proposed standard, and if we go through the cycle again and the ISG wants to push back on it, we'll do an epicycle on that.
Roman, yeah, I'll take that as my problem. I'll take a look.
I mean, from my perspective, the technical changes you made are sufficient, otherwise the document seems correct. So my questions are only about energy.
Yeah, understood. Thank you, Eric.
So just a comment, there are actual implementations of the draft.
And where can I get an easy list of those implementations?
It's not listed in the draft. I believe there have been email messages about them. We can, of course, resend.
Diego Lopez, Telefónica. It was sent on the list when discussing with Hector about this review, and well, it's an implementation based on Boulder and is publicly available on GitHub. At least there is one, the one that we have made. And yes, we are using it. Just.
I guess the point I'm trying to make here is not about having software; it's about having deployment. This is a certificate issuance protocol. So if there are not going to be certificates issued using this mechanism, then that's the thing I'm objecting to. So in any case, like I said, I'm taking my AD hat off now because this will not be my problem. But that's the thing I'm saying is don't advance things before standard unless people are going to do them. And if you are going to do them, great. But I've seen a lot of post standards that nobody does, and that just makes us all look silly.
Isn't this sort of an obvious time for the chairs to ask if anyone's going to deploy this? Colin Jennings, sorry, I forgot to say my name. I was just sort of curious if there's a reason we're avoiding that question.
No, we've heard in previous meetings that people do intend at some point after there's an RFC to deploy that, but nobody's really going to commit. If anybody wants to run to Mackie, yeah, I'm going to implement it now, great, but...
Michael Richardson, so Anima is not a thing that's going to implement it, but we have more or less in our ACP said, go look here, this is a really good idea, and you probably want to do this. So I don't know if that's, it's not exactly implementing so much as it is saying, yeah, we really need it. So.
Okay, this is in any case going to go to the list and to email exchanges with the ADs, so we'll take it there. Rifat, are you in the room?
Hello? my name is Rifat. I'll be talking about device attestation. If it goes, oh, takes time, I guess. Oh, there you go. Okay, so what I'm trying to achieve with this draft is try to automate the issuance of certificates to devices, especially during initial deployment of those devices. Specifically, what I'm trying to achieve is the ability to deploy a specific certificate for a specific device to allow that device access to a specific service, not just a generic device certificate. Okay. So this slide is just this slide showing the different parties in this setup and the initial trust. So you have the DA as the device authority, which is the manufacturer of that device, and then you have the device itself. Now there is an initial trust between the device and the DA, so they will be able to mutually authenticate each other, and there is that trust between the DA and the Acme CA. Now, the initial setup is that the client will be able to, will need to create an account with the DA and then claim that device. As with any other Acme operations, they will have to create an account with Acme and prove control over a specific service URL. So that's the setup. So this slide is trying to show the big picture of the flow, and later we'll dig into kind of the Acme flow itself. So the device starts with communicating with the DA, authenticating itself, and obtaining a JOT. The device then will create a CSR locally on the device and push the CSR and the JOT to the client. The client then will start the operation, the Acme operation with the Acme CA, obtains that certificate and pushes that certificates back to the device. So that's at a high level. Now I'll talk about that kind of the interaction between the client and the Acme CA. So the client starts the process with a regular Acme new order with the key ID as the customer.com in this case. The difference is that the URL will be pointing back to the DA in this case. So, and finalize and authorizations URL will be created. The client then will post a request to the with the JOT to authorize that operation, get the 200 OK status, and then send the CSR request to the Acme CA to obtain a URL for the certificate itself. So the difference here is that what you see in red here. So typically you will see customer.com also all the way in the URL too. In this case, we're talking about the authorization going to be happening from based on the DA. So that's the reason the URL is vendor.com in this case. And the difference also is that in step 2, you'll get a URL to be able to push an authorization for that operation. Typically with the Acme CA, you'll get, there's another round trip of request and response to get that. So in this case, we're doing directly. So that the draft also identifies. Go ahead.
Sorry, on this slide, I'm a bit confused here. So it looks like in line 1 there, the request is going to the CA, which is on acme.com, but the URL, and I assume that's the URL parameter of the JWS, is pointing to vendor.com. That
Yes.
seems like a pretty radical. So that's the case.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say here is that instead of just saying that the customer.com, you indicate that the authorization will be coming later on from vendor.com, because that's the party that will be issuing the JOT itself, right?
Okay, I'm trying to understand the syntax proposal here. Like, so in the Acme request, there's in the JWS payload in the Acme request, there is a URL parameter which is intended to specify the path on the CA where this request is intended to go. Is that what you're proposing to modify?
On the CA?
So on the CA's Acme server, right? Like the URL parameter in the JWS provides the binding between it expresses the intended destination of that request by the client, which is a URL on the CA's Acme server. So it seems like a pretty significant change to change, if you're going to change that URL field, like that's a pretty significant change to the security model of Acme.
So, in general, with the typical Acme, if I remember correctly, so you will get that URL in a subsequent request, right? So, why is it different?
I'll take a look at the document.
Okay. So the draft also defines a device identifier for the MAC. So you have a type and a value with the MAC as the identifier. Here is an example of a JOT. In this case, we're talking about the issuer. It will be the vendor.com. The subject will be the MAC address of that device. And I'm trying to limit the JOT to a specific client communicating with the Acme. So in this case, I'm showing audience has both of those. There's no kind of a well-defined claim today to kind of put the customer.com in a JOT, and we're working on kind of trying to define a specific claim for that. And at the end, what you get is a certificate with a MAC address and a specific service URL. So the device will be able to authenticate itself to that service, making sure that it is a specific device accessing a specific service. That's all I have. Any questions, comments?
Carsten Bormann, I cannot claim to fully have understood what you're trying to do, but I need to apologize for being a professor. Does authorization become attestation by being packaged into a certificate?
Sorry, say that again.
Authorization become attestation by being packaged in a certificate? Why do you think the term attestation applies here?
So I'm not sure what do you mean. Like,
you had a first slide that had the word attestation on
right.
it, and I expected.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the JOT is kind of authorizing the issuance of a certificate for a specific device with a specific access to a specific service. That's what I'm trying to.
So that's what you call attestation.
Yes.
Okay.
Carsten, did that answer your question?
It did answer my question. It didn't use all my concern.
Okay. So Michael Richardson, I was very interested in your talk, and the in general, what I see is that in Acme is that the various challenges that we do are essentially attesting to the existence of, the device, and so you're basically delegating that to something else.
Right.
Okay. And so I think that's where the terminology kind of. Does that translate the terminology better? We don't call it attestation in Acme. We call it a challenge. And I think that's the connection bridging different technologies. That makes more sense to me. That's how I understand it anyway. Maybe that's not how you explain it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's good.
Watson Ladd, I'm going to ask a question that probably might be out of scope for his draft. What kind of certificate is being produced by this process?
What kind of a certificate?
Does it have SANs for DNS entries?
No, so yeah, it will have a DNS entry for customer.com, for example, but we'll have also the MAC address of that specific device. So it's two identifiers. So let me, so here's what I'm kind of looking into the certificate, to have two identifiers, the MAC address and the service URI.
Okay, I have a bunch of questions that are not relevant to this working group. One question I have that is relevant is why do you need the vendor to be involved in this issuance process? Why can't it go through customer.com?
Because I'm trying to automate this whole process. So the whole idea, you get the device you buy a device from vendor, we want to be able just to immediately deploy it without doing anything, but that deployment will be automatic. You'll get the certificate, and you will be able to automatically start accessing that device by authenticating that device. You have a mutual authentication.
Let's take this offline.
Okay, yeah. So on the mailing list, happy to discuss that. Any other comments?
Okay, so how many people have read this draft? Yeah, that's what I figured. So I think it's too early to hum for adoption. So what I would suggest is that you add some terminology, because words like attestation, cryptographic binding and stuff mean a different thing in pretty much any document that mentions them. So just you add this, and then we'll ask people to read it, and then we can, well, either hum or ask on the list whether people want to adopt this.
Okay.
So thank you.
Good. Thank you.
And Kathleen, I think you're up next. And this is another suggested new work, proposal for a new work.
Hi. So, thank you. I wanted to see and get a feel of the working group to see who was interested in different types of client certificates. This is a pretty bare bones draft because I wanted to get a pulse of what was interesting. Some things I'm not quite sure are interesting, but I wanted to cover the spectrum and then figure out from there challenge types that might need to be added and things of that nature. But I wanted the pulse first. Yeah, thank you. It's short. So 3 types to consider: device, end user, code signing. Go ahead. Device certificates. So one thing for the IP address draft, there is a case for device client certificates to the IP address based. And so I'm wondering if that could really be instead added to the IP address draft. I think that makes more sense. Right now it's written as it's for server. You may only have the distinction there in the CSR, but that's just not clear from how it's written. So I'd like to figure that out, and if we could put that in the IP address draft. And you might have on an internal network a CA that supports Acme. So if you have like a cluster of systems and one is acting as the CA, that would be the use case for it. So you might have non-routable addresses or whatnot, but this would be specific to your environment so that you could get your systems up with trusted connections. And looking at 855.5, it calls out explicitly web server certificates. And looking at this, you could use DNS, and you could use the same challenge type. But when people look at that draft, they see web server certificates. So do we need anything different, is my question to the working group, to do this for client device certificates? And so does that mean is there another challenge type that makes sense? I think the DNS kind of makes sense. Is the only differentiation point in the CSR, or does the interface need some other differentiation point? Like if people are interested to do this, which I am.
So you're on Sheffer. So I'm interested, but this doesn't work for me at all because I'm looking at cloud deployments. This is very traditional on-premise kind of thing. So you mentioned non-routable addresses.
Well, I was
but-
saying that was possible, right?
Yeah.
So I would like to cover the generic device client certificates, right? So I'd like to make sure we're covering whatever use cases are important to people.
So,
But
so
that would get out of just, web server, and do we need to do anything different, or is it just the CSR where there's a difference?
So for cloud deployments, there's the well-known distinction of cattle versus pets. So named stuff versus really unnamed stuff that's compliant with some sort of policy. So it's part of a group of devices or endpoints or whatever you call them, but it's not really named. It doesn't have its own identity, but still needs a certificate.
Yep.
So I would like to see this evolve towards covering these cases as well.
Okay. All right, great. So I'd love to hear if you think additional challenge types are needed, or how, so I would love feedback as if this is of interest to progress.
This is Joe Hall, JabberScribe, relaying a mic question from Thomas Peterson. There are circumstances where IP or DNS are not appropriate, parentheses, cloud, IoT, etc. Should this not be explicitly limited?
Should you trailed off?
So there are circumstances where IP or DNS are not appropriate. Should this not be explicitly limited?
Yeah, so this is like a bare bones draft. Let's discuss what's needed and let's fill it out.
Paul Wouters, Red Hat. We also experimenting with some IPsec usage of Acme certificates. So sometimes there are some different EKUs and other properties on those certificates. Usually they're made backwards compatible to be like TLS server or TLS client, but it would be nice if it could also work with like either the sort of, I think it's RFC 45, 43 IPsec profile certificates.
Okay, cool.
Richard Barnes. So to the degree that these clients are identifying themselves with DNS names or IP addresses, I don't think there's any new work necessary here. It's already possible to express the client auth EKU in your CSR, and then it's just up to the CA's policy what they'll issue.
Yeah,
all
so the only thing is it raised questions for engineers looking at the draft. They said, oh, this isn't covered. But my read of it was, it was. That's why I wanted to ask the working group.
Yeah,
because you could just change the CSR, right? And I put that in this draft.
Yeah, all the stuff about web servers in the front is like non-normative motivational text. Like it's supposed to help you feel good and help you feel like you understand the use case here.
Yeah, I wish I had some of these engineers look at that prior, because I would have asked for text changes.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. To some of the other points that were raised, like if people want to identify their clients in other ways, like absolutely we should define like new identifier types, new challenge types. Some of these are already on the agenda today for other reasons. But I think the idea that I don't think there's a core difference between client certs and server certs here, other than just the EKU. In fact, I think I've heard that some folks are already using Let's Encrypt certs for as client certs in some server-to-server mutual auth cases. So there's some existing usage out there.
So they're issuing client certs, or they're using server certs. So
the only difference between a server cert and a client cert is whether the EKU bit says server auth or client auth. Like either way, you're authenticating the domain name. So I don't remember off the top of my head whether the cases I've heard about were actually issuing with the client auth bit, or whether they were just ignoring the EKU and authenticating the domain name.
Yeah, so I'm not talking web server examples too. So there might be some checks that are done that are different.
I think the examples I've heard of are in SMTP cases. So like,
I'm not SM. I work for Dell EMC. I'm not talking about SMTP either. Okay. Right. So I don't know what kind of checks. I think some of the checks go beyond in the certificate content types. So I get, and I wrote in the draft that CSR changes are enough to make this request. I just wanted to make sure my read of that didn't underestimate somebody else's use cases.
Yeah, I mean, Eric Squirrel, best as I can make out, this document adequately covers adequately covers things that like have domain names in them and are used as certificates. Things that perhaps have different kinds of names, of course, it may not adequately cover.
I couldn't hear you. Just the last sentence.
Things that have different kind of identifiers, of course, it may not adequately cover.
Colin James, Kathleen, I'm sorry, I have a really stupid question. The absolutely awful agenda for this meeting doesn't have the draft names, and I haven't read the draft because it wasn't there. What is the draft name so I can find it?
So I had trouble posting. It's posted to the mailing list, and it's in an email to the internet draft because I got back a really funny error message.
Okay.
So there's no problem with it, but XML or
That
RFC
explains
works.
my
but
difficulty. Thank you.
yeah, sorry about that. So I'd like to hear more on the list. It sounds like some people are, I guess I'm going the wrong direction, but that makes no sense. So can you advance it? So I'd like to hear more. It sounds like there are some people with interest, but we have to see what it fleshes out to for other use cases and if there's enough there. So the next one is end user certificates. So my personal opinion is no, we shouldn't do this. But since I was covering 2 other device types, I wanted to bring this up to see if anyone was interested. There's some good arguments in NIST 863 on identity proofing that you don't want to tie these together for privacy reasons. But I wanted to make sure I did that poll.
Alexei Melnikov. So the SMIME TLS certificate is a more specific case of this.
Okay.
So I'm just,
Yep.
this is more of a statement. I'm not making judgment about whether something more generic is needed, but that's a very specific
Yes,
case
so that's interesting. So are there other use cases like that would be replicated from the SMIME, or should something more generic be done? And so if people want to discuss that on the list, if there is anything, great. I don't have something specific there that I'm trying to drive.
Do you have a thought about what more generic might be? Like what that might consist, like what way?
I don't have a use case, so I'm just throwing it out there in case somebody did, so that
right.
we don't have the case that like the engineers who looked at RFC 8555 and said, wait, you can't do this, you can't do that. I was like, well, you can. So
right. So
didn't know what else might have been missed, and so I figured somebody else might.
Sure.
And it's better to ask.
Sure. For what it's worth, my sense is the general 8555 framework can be used for a variety of certificate types, but that any specific client certificate presumably would need its own document describing the identifier categories and how you did the challenges. So I don't think we need a new meta framework that covers client side certificates that but somehow in order to enable those documents.
Right. So if somebody wanted, actual end users, to the extent like FIDO is already doing something similar enough to there, so why bother is my opinion, but I was throwing that out.
So Joe Hall relaying a mic question from Thomas Peterson. I think we should. Enterprise are heavy users of client certs in browser, but requires figuring out browser integration.
Okay, so more on the list on that would be really helpful from that person. So Thomas. Okay, and the last one, if you could advance because this isn't working for me, is code signing certificates. And for this one, I think it would require a new pre-authorization type. We probably could do something right now for just standard certificates with the existing challenge types. But for EV certificates, I poked at it a little bit to figure out what's the issuance process. So usually there's an account created, and so there's a proofing of the organization. There's at least 2 administrators. Contact information is associated with the account, and then they do something via a portal. Could it be further automated through the use of Acme? And so email, SMS, or some other type of challenge type could be possible to further automate this.
Max Para, Cable Labs. We actually have a lot of experience with that because in our infrastructure, we actually use code signing certificates to sign all the firmwares for cable modems and our equipment. The procedures are really, really strict.
Yeah.
I would not feel comfortable automating many of those because we require verification of the business, etc. And we always have to have only well-identified people that can request the certificate. And we always have to have a validation that they actually requested, because these certificates are a lot more than EV certificates. These really keep our infrastructure secure, so they cost a lot of money and they have special requirements. So I don't know if this is a good case.
Yeah, so I wanted to poke at it more because I was asked to poke at it, right? And to see, is there a way to do this? And so, I was hoping somebody else might be interested to explore it, to see what's possible rather than just saying no.
Watson Ladd, I'm very sorry to just say no, but email and SMS both are terrible, terrible ways for authenticating something like this. SMS especially.
Yep.
We have seen 2FA attacks on SMS in the wild. We should not be adopting SMS as an authentication mechanism at this time.
Do you have any recommendations for people who want to do this? Or maybe the level isn't EV, right? So they might be doing standard certificate types.
I'm not familiar enough with the problem domain to understand what would be an acceptable level of assurance. I believe the way code signing certificates are being used to push out updates automatically demands a very high level of trust.
Yeah, I get that.
And I think we should talk more.
Yeah, and that's why I didn't spec these out, because I figured it would be a waste of time and wanted to bring it to the working group to see who might be interested, what levels might be possible, and other use cases.
We're gonna cut the line after the current speakers.
Sure. John, and I'll keep this brief because I'm going to talk about this exact thing in a minute, I think. We actually created this framework for the stir stuff we're doing here in Acme that's called this authority token concept. And this is a step of automation where you know that there is some external authorization process being conducted by a third-party entity. And that could be an extremely complex, enrollment process that involves business process and everything else. And the way that I think this might be relevant to what you're talking about is it is an automation step. Right, there is a way to automate the process of getting a JOT from this authority, and provided the CAs have the proper trust relationship with the authorities, there's a workflow we derive for that. Could be helpful for something like this. Just as you touched on.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I did think that the out of bands in the beginning to set up an account couldn't be replaced, if, depending on the level for this.
Just a comment on the authorization types for Karthikeyan, Bhargavan, Indriya. A comment on the authorization types. We did some analysis on Acme and published this last year. And we made a strong distinction between write authorization, like you do with the DNS and HTTPS and even in the old TLS-NI stuff, and read authorization channels like email and SMS. And we show that read authorization channels like email and SMS are distinctly weaker. In fact, they
distinctly
are weaker.
Weaker, yeah.
So they're qualitatively very different than write and read. And in fact, there are reasonable looking attacks that appear the moment you add email or SMS to Acme in general. So be warned.
Yeah. And, I only just pulled this together last week and purposely didn't fill out and waste my time on these mechanisms because I wanted to see what people thought and what mechanisms might be best first.
Yes, Arnaud Tadei, Symantec. Just to echo the comment on SMS, it's a problem.
And point taken. We don't have to beat a dead horse. And I didn't spec it out thinking it was the best thing since sliced bread either. So, I'm not committed to anything. More of let's figure out if there are ways to go forward, or it sounds like there's some interest. So if people want to work with me on this, it clearly needs more development. I don't think it's even ready to ask adoption, but I'm interested in, collaborating with whomever's interested and see if we can come up with something interesting enough that could be adopted.
Okay, good. So encourage more discussion on the list, and perhaps we'll revisit this.
So just one suggestion, I think one thing that could help this, help you get what your work done is to kind of maybe put a sharper scope on this. Because as we've discussed, a lot of these cases we've talked about are already covered with the existing mechanisms we have.
Yeah, the draft states
so if we can kind of shave
that,
off what's already covered and focus on what the real novelty is, I think that would help clear it up.
Yeah, so even the draft I posted has a whole bunch of this text will be deleted sections, but I guess one output is my request that the IP address document explicitly talks about client certificates. Just for people who read it so they're not confused.
Thank you.
So, yeah, John, are you in the room?
Hello, I'm John. I'm going to talk about authority tokens for Acme. Extremely exciting, relevant to much what we've been discussing. Next slide, please. We'll go quick. The basic idea behind this, and again, this was motivated by this stir work. We're trying to beat this robocalling stuff. Just as a refresher on what this is actually all about, we abstracted this into a generic need for authorities to be able to provide a token that could be used in Acme challenges to respond to the CA to say, hey, some third-party entity that is responsible for something that isn't a domain name, some other namespace, some other identifier class, has vetted whoever this Acme client is and thinks it's cool for them to be issued a certificate for this resource. That's the basic idea. The draft is Draft Acme Token Authority, and it's really a pretty generic framework. The way we've defined it initially is for JOTs. Next slide, because I think we have it there. But we created a registry, so if we want to use things other than JOTs as ways to kind of attest from a third-party authority, hey, this person is legit, you should issue them a certificate for the following identifier. It is flexible enough to incorporate that, and that could be useful for a lot of these other identifiers, right, than the DNS that we seem to be getting increasingly interested in here. Next slide. So this is the description of the ATC token TK auth type, which again, as I said, uses JOT. This is what it would actually look like in an Acme response. The ATC itself is buried down there in that payload element, and we'll break out that so you can look at it because this is the main thing we've changed in this version in a sec. But next slide. So what's new in 03 and 02? Yes, we very abruptly issued an 03 at the beginning of this week, as Chris Wendt and I have still been kind of ironing out the interaction of this with this new STIR delegation mechanism that we're defining over in STIR. The big things we've done is actually fleshed out a REST interface, an interface so you can go to one of these token authorities and request one of these tokens. We cribbed this actually from work that is being done on ADIS, in ADIS for specifying how people are going to get the certificates we need in order to be able to attest ownership of telephone numbers so we can prevent spoofing, so we can in turn prevent robocalling, which would be absolutely amazing. And what we did is we beefed up the ATC structure in this revision. It wasn't terribly good JSON previously, and we tried to give it the semantics we think it actually needs to do what the use case requires. Largely that included actually getting a good way to do authority scope. And this is just a notion of when you're going to a token authority, to this kind of third-party oracle and asking, hey, give me a token I can then pass to the CA. How do you specify kind of what the scope of the authority is that you're requesting? And the way that we decided to do that, this is the main thing we changed between 02 and 03, is effectively just to give the ATC you would like the authority, the token authority to issue to it, get it to sign it, give it back to you, and then you can put it in the Acme challenge with your CSR, get your cert. A couple of interesting things we're doing here. This is not something I'm sure anybody else is doing because of the way we want to do delegation in STIR. And this is actually kind of similar to RPKI delegation. We use something like the encompassing semantics for certificates. In other words, where if you think about telephone number allocation, right? There's big blocks of telephone numbers. We want to be able to delegate down, okay, this carrier has this huge block. They delegate maybe 100 numbers to an enterprise, and that enterprise may delegate a single number down to a telephone, which it will then use that cert to sign telephone calls so you know they're not being spoofed. Because of that, we want to actually be able to use Acme to ask for CA certs. Certs with a CA Boolean equal to true, so that when that enterprise gets their initial cert allocation from Acme, they will be able to delegate down themselves an individual certificate to a particular single telephone number user. I asked Richard Barnes about this and was like, does Acme like work with this? And he's like, probably. I mean, again, just put it in the CSR, CA Boolean is true, and it should work. So, but if anybody wants to barf on that, this would be a good time. We think it's cool for our use case, but I don't see anybody barfing. I see some thumbs up. in the crowd? Okay. I think it was the only thing was like really like interesting or controversial potentially in this. And that needs to be reflected in the ATC element, so that has its own internal Boolean, because you do want the token authority who is telling the CA to issue the certificate to know you are asking for one with the CA Boolean equal to true. They might not like that. That is basically a policy engine for this. So we put that in. We also added some minimal IANA considerations because we basically had nothing before. Next slide.
Before you go on, a question. Is there a stir equivalent of name constraints?
So the way that we're doing this, and this is very similar to RPKI, we really did kind of crib from this. I mean, the thing is the TN auth list, in the certs, there's this new element we defined that's called TN auth list, and that's where you would stick those telephone numbers. Yep. Effectively, what we were saying is that is the name constraints. When we first looked at this, we were like, should we have like a separate like TN constraints element that is adjacent to that? But ultimately, I think the same way RPKI encompassing works, it seems like if you get this, 1,000 block from your carrier and you're sub-going down 100 block, well, it is the thing that said you have 1,000 block that is the constraint that says you're allowed to issue the 100 block, and then in turn, it is the constraint if that's issuing down a single number to some other entity. So it seemed redundant to actually just do like 5280 name constraints.
Are your relying parties enforcing this?
Well, so we have verification services required to enforce it. That's the way we're going to do it in STIR, is that we are pushing it to the relying parties, and that's there are edges, there are hard edges on this actually in the way the telephone number allocation works, because there are weirdnesses about numbering plans and things like that. So it requires the verification service to have a certain amount of domain expertise in how number allocation works. We think that in this use case, we can assume that, but you hear the tenuousness in my voice about it. I think it's okay.
Yeah, because on the web it wasn't enforced at all, so we had a lot of trouble with that.
Understood, and yeah, I've read about how name constraints have their own issues on this. Yes.
Max Park, Cable Labs. Regarding the CA indication in the CSR, I would advise against it because in the past some CAs might have the practice of just copying some extension from the CSR to the certificates, and this extension should be particularly guarded because it's very particular. I would suggest instead, if it's possible, to use an attribute where you indicate maybe the type of profile of certificates that you want to get. So if you use an attribute that will not be risked to be copied somehow by some software, and because usually what is in the CSR, you don't really trust it. You always want to verify it. This could be a little more secure than just putting the CA extension.
Well, do recall, as it says here, this optional flag that's the Boolean that's in the authority token itself.
Oh, okay.
It's the presence of that flag in the token that tells the CA that the token authority has said it's okay to set the Boolean. We just assumed we'd have to put it in the CSR as well, right? But the point is, there's kind of a belt and suspenders. It's both in the CSR and it's in this authority token. And the CA's job, if it supports this extension, is compliant with it, is to look at that ATC.
But
right?
what ties the token to the CSR?
There's a fingerprint and binding. There's like all this stuff that the way that the ATC works that effectively you are taking the information you're going to put in the CSR and feeding it to the token authority. It signs it, gives it back, and then you use that to push to the CA.
Maybe you don't need it in the CSR. Why do you need it in the CSR? Is it
because I guess I naively assume that the CSR is going to be what the entity actually produces a certificate for. I mean, this is the way CSRs have traditionally been used, right? I don't assume that a lot of policy decisions go into like how the CSR gets transformed after. But you tell me, Richard, am I right about that?
Richard Barnes. So I think to avoid confusion and ambiguity in this kind of automated issuance interaction, 8555 basically requests that the CA issue the certificate as the CSR specifies. Right. And not modify anything, not tweak anything, not like flip the CA bit because it thinks it should be a CA.
But that's the point. I want it to
we try to maximize the fidelity between the CSR and the issued certificate.
Does it apply to all the extension that you put in the CA certificate? Subject key identifier, authority key identifier. You modify that. It's not in the CSR, so I don't understand this argument.
Yeah, I don't think that it's like there's like real hard language in there. So I don't think there's hard requirements. But I think if I recall correctly, what's in the RFC is something like if the CA cannot issue the certificate as requested in the CSR. So where the CSR specifies something, you should follow. You should issue that specifically. So if there's like an extension request with a specific extension contents, you should have that specific extension contents in the certificate. That doesn't mean the CA can't like add the extensions that correspond to the CA's policy, but you should, where the CSR specifies something, you should stick with that specification. And again, I don't think it's a hard requirement, but following this approach is consistent with that general approach within the app.
So one sec, stop. We have about 4 minutes left, and John was up all night to get these slides to us by 8:15 this morning. So out of courtesy, unless it's a short clarifying question, let's let him get through and we'll continue discussion offline.
From what you just said, Max Pala, Cable Labs, actually, if you don't put the CA extension in the CSR, the CA can put it in there. So I don't. They're not changing that.
Again, because the way that we have defined the extension, right, the authority token itself, you're not supposed to do it unless the authority token, the token authority is actually put in the ATC, CA boolean equals true. Like, I think there is a policy backstop. I don't think that there's like some risk that like accidentally the CA boolean is going to get set true because somebody's being like sneaky and puts that in the CSR and not in the ATC. I mean, we can put in an even harder language about that. That's like, absolutely, you must check this, and unless that is present, you must not issue, a certificate for the CSR or CA boolean is true. Chris
Wen, yeah, I was just going to add, although I think the framework is fine by itself, in the telephone world, there is the authority not only allows you to issue these certificates, but it's also the enforcer if any bad things are happening.
I mean, it is the place that policy, that's the point. It's the place the policy set, not the CA. It's not the CA's decision to set the CA boolean. It's the token authority's decision to set the CA boolean. And so, I mean, it has to come down from that. Anyway, this is what this looks like. There's this optional element you can add for CA equals true, but for the most part, you're just doing the fingerprints, and that the TK value there is the thing that you're signing off on. That's all the base64 encoding of what the telephone numbers and other junk looks like. Next slide. So we still need to add like security considerations and privacy considerations and stuff to this, but otherwise I think this is relatively baked at this point, and we're starting to see this going to production. So I think this should be ready for some harder review at this point once we get the seccons in there. Anything else?
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to remind everybody that even if you're here only for CFRG and you've ignored everything that's been said here, you still have to sign the blue sheet. So please, if you haven't done so, please do so right now.
Bring them up and sign up here so that we can clear out for CFRG. Thank you.
Thank you all, and we're adjourned.
They'll be up here because Kay's got to hand them out. Yeah, thanks. Please bring the blue sheets up here now. Yeah.